In this video, we're going to be solving a quadratic equation by factoring. Did you know that there are about 4 ways to solve a quadratic equation? You could use the quadratic formula, you could do factoring, which is what we're going to do this time, you could complete the square, or simply just by graphing it. So let's practice solving one by factoring. Here we have the equation 2x squared minus 3x plus 1 equals 6. The first thing that we want to do is to get everything on the same side. So we're going to go ahead and subtract the 6 from both sides, so that then we've got the equation 2x squared minus 3x minus 5 equals 0. Now, to factor this, because our leading coefficient is not a 1, we're going to go ahead and create what I like to call the disco box of factoring. And the disco box of factoring is pretty easy. We're going to take this first piece, this 2x squared, and we're going to put it in the first box. So 2x squared. Then we're going to take the very, very last thing, which is the minus 5, and we're going to put it in the last box. Now these two boxes these two boxes right here, those boxes are created by multiplying the pieces of our first box with our last box, right? So our first box and our last box, we're going to multiply those together and get a negative 10x squared. Now this part is pretty easy. The x's, okay, they're just going to split. That's what you do with the x's for the x squared. Now to do the next part though, you're going to look at a factor tree, or not really a factor tree, but kind of looking for the factors of negative 10, but those factors have to add up to something specific. Those factors have to add up to this minus 3 right here. So we could go, okay, let's see, a 1 and a 10, that won't work. A 2 and a 5 will work though, but because I need to be a negative 3 and a negative 10, right, negative 10, that means that one of those numbers has to be negative. So because it's going to be a negative 3, that means that the 5 needs to be negative. So in one box, I'm going to put the 2, and in one box, I'm going to put the negative 5. And it doesn't matter which one you put where. So I'll put the 2 here, and I'll put the negative 5 there. So see how colorful that box is? It's kind of like a disco box. And now we're just going to look to see what columns have in common and what rows have in common. So let's start with this row. What does that row have in common? Well, they both have a 2 and they both have an x. So we're going to go ahead and take out a 2x. And what does this row have in common? Well, they both have a negative 5, so I'll go ahead and take out my negative 5. Now, sometimes they don't have a negative in common, but if your first box that you come to is negative, you can take the negative out as well. All right, let's do our columns. What does that column have in common? Just an x. So we're only going to be able to take out an x from this column. How about this column? Yeah, it doesn't have anything in common. So all we can put here is a positive 1. And it's a positive because my first number is a positive. Now to finish writing my factors, I'm going to take these pieces right here. And I'm going to write them as an x plus 1 and as 2x minus 5, and it doesn't matter the order I put those in. And then I'm going to set those equal to 0. And now we're going to do one of the best things ever, the zero product property. So that tells me that x plus 1, I'm going to go ahead and set that equal to 0. And the 2x minus 5, and I can set that equal to 0. And when I do that, I'll be able to find my solutions. So I will subtract 1 from each side here and get x equals a negative 1. And this one's going to be a little bit more work since we have 2 steps. So we have 2x equals a 5. Then we'll divide both sides by 2 and get, oops, there we go, x equals 5 halves here. So we'll see that we'll come up with 2 answers, x equals a negative 1 and x equals 5 halves. Now we're not entirely done because we want to make sure that we don't have an extraneous solution. So we're going to have to plug both of those answers back into our equation and make sure that they work. So we'll check our first answer. So 2, so we're just going to set it up, and everywhere that there's an x, we're going to leave a space, and we're going to use the original equation. So we're looking, does that equal 6? So we'll start off by plugging in that -1. And we're going to use a calculator here, right? So we're going to go plug into our calculator, 2 times -1 squared minus 3 times -1 plus 1, and that's going to give us a value of 6. So when we match those up, we see like, hey, yep, that worked. So we know that x minus 1 is a solution. And now we'll check our second answer. So we'll do the same thing. We'll leave spaces. And again, we want to know, does it equal 6? So we'll plug in those 5/2. And again, we're going to use our calculator, and we're going to type in 2 times the fraction 5/2 squared minus 3 times the fraction 5/2 plus 1. And we're also going to get a value of 6, which also matches, which means x equals 5/2 is in fact a solution. So again, once you find your answers, it's important to plug them back in to make sure that they work and that they're not extraneous.